is CBS Eye on the World. Here's John Batchelor.
The New World Report. I welcome my colleagues, Joseph Umair, the Executive Director of Secure Free Society, and Ernesto Araujo, former Foreign Minister for the state of Brazil. We have Brazil in front of us, but we begin with the sound of gunfire. This is a headline in these last days. Paraguayan prosecutors murder in Colombia. Likely transnational hit. The first graph. The murder of a Paraguayan prosecutor known for fighting organized crime was likely the victim of, quote, transnational criminals working across borders, the head of Colombia's police said, as both countries pledged to probe the high-profile hit. The man's name was Marcelo Pecci. Joseph, I immediately turn to you because you brought this to my attention when it was in Spanish. We've just spoken of Paraguay and the ambition of the Paraguayan government to build a transnational highway, a transcontinental highway, and also Paraguay in the mix today of recovering from the pandemic. However, in the past, we've spoken of the tri-border region and the smuggling, the drug running, the lawlessness that can exist in those three countries, Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay. What is your information about this quite public murder, cruel murder by unknown shooters? They apparently walked up to him and shot him in the face in front of his wife. What is your information about why now, why in Colombia? Good evening to you, Joseph.
Good evening, John. So first of all, let me just say, I think this is probably one of the most shocking murders, probably since the murder of Alberto Nisman back in 2015 in Argentina. And I say that because of what you described, John, kind of the blatant way in which they killed him, the very public message that was sent when they assassinated Marcelo Pecci. He was not only assassinated in front of his wife, recently newlywed, but apparently his wife was expecting a baby. So she had just found out that she was pregnant and posted that on social media. But more so than that, I think the idea that a prosecutor that's been involved in very complex cases on transnational organized crime and international terrorism takes a vacation, and you would think, he out of his country, out of the places where he's prosecuted most of his cases, and you would think he's relatively safe, but he could get murdered in this manner. I think it's a strong message. And so this moves me a little bit into what's the possible suspects, because this is something that the Colombian police have been discussing, although they haven't said too much publicly. They have given some public declarations. There's basically two main I won't call them theories, or two main lines of investigation into looking into the murder of Marcelo Pecci. The first is related, let me say both are related to cases that he had worked on previously, recently, in recent years. The first is related to a massive drug trafficking and money laundering case that had to do with drug traffickers in multiple countries, both in Latin America and in Europe. We're talking about Colombian drug cartels. We're talking about Brazilian drug cartels. We're talking about Peruvian drug cartels, and the money laundering that was passing through Paraguay and moving over to Europe, particularly to Italy. And this case, which is called Otranza, was a big hit against these drug networks because they were able to seize upwards of about $150 million, which is a lot of money for anyone, and even for drug traffickers. The other line of investigation has to do with Hezbollah. And this is how I know Marcelo Pecci. I should say I've met the prosecutor on different occasions because of the work he was doing with investigating Hezbollah financial networks in the tri-border area. And in 2018, he was the lead prosecutor for arresting and then eventually extraditing a very prominent Hezbollah financier, a Hezbollah support network, an individual named Nader Farhat, who ended up getting extradited to the United States in 2019, which later led to the arrest of a big fish in Paraguay, a prominent Paraguayan Lebanese individual named Qasem Mohammed Hijazi. Now, Hijazi is known as kind of like the Al Capone, or one of the Al Capones of the tri-border area. And the fact that they were able to not only arrest him, but extradite him, I think that caused a big stir inside Paraguay and all these countries. So these are the different leads that they're working on. If you ask me, John, I think the Hezbollah link is something that should not be ignored. I think it's very because different from some of the other cases that Marcelo worked on, he was the lead prosecutor in the Hezbollah cases. He was one of many prosecutors in the other cases, but in the Hezbollah case, and he was known for that. He had a reputation, a good reputation among the prosecutors and law enforcement entities, because he was the one that helped bring these cases to justice. So I think that's a place that the prosecutors should look that are investigating his murder.
Joseph, is it significant that the murder took place in Colombia? Or is it just that's where he took his holiday? They would have tracked him down even if he was in Miami.
No, John, I think it is significant because I think the message isn't just for Paraguayan prosecutors or law enforcement. I think the message is for all of Latin America and specifically Colombian prosecutors and law enforcement, because that's another country that's working very hard against these transnational criminal organizations, including Hezbollah. And I think just to reemphasize something that Ernesto said, I think is very important, is that a lot of times, especially even when they're investigating the murder of Marcelo Pecci, they're thinking, oh, we got to look at this angle, which has to do with criminal organizations, or we look at this angle that has to do with international terrorist organizations. The reality is they could be both. Right? It could be Hezbollah contracting a cartel to carry out a hit against a prosecutor for something that is going to look like it belongs to somebody else, but they could be the actual intellectual authors. There's a concept that we talk about in the defense community here in the U.S. called convergence, which means that maybe terrorists and public corrupt officials and criminal cartels don't necessarily have the same ideological or strategic objectives, but they're definitely connected through logistical networks. They basically operate within the same ecosystem. So I think it's important what Ernesto is saying, because we tend to separate this within our bureaucracies, but in reality, on the ground, in real life, they work very much in the same world. And I think that's going to be important when investigating a complex case like the murder of the Paraguayan prosecutor Marcelo Pecci.
Ernesto mentions Russia. You've talked about Russia's influence peddling in Colombia and Venezuela. Is Russia, to your understanding, involved in the narco-terrorism gangs of Venezuela and Colombia?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, the case that we talked about previously on the program was a massive money laundering case. I mean, we're talking about $150 million that was laundered through sports betting sites and cryptocurrency coming from Russia into Colombia and then out to the Caribbean. So yes, the Russian mafia, the Russian criminal networks, they're all over Latin America, and they're definitely inside Colombia. And that's one of the complexities to this, because we may just look at Iran, but Iran could work through Russia if they want to cover their tracks. And the Russians could actually mislead investigators if that's what they're looking to do. So these are very complex cases because we're working with networks. And unless you understand those networks, it's going to be hard to tackle these threats.